start this presentation, the students will have read their textbook and they will have filled out a reading guide, which went over a couple concepts like art, philosophy, things that we will touch in this PowerPoint here. So this is just reaffirming what they already read in the book and answered in their study or their reading guide. So we are talking about ancient Greece today, and that's a concept that came up in your reading guide and during your reading, and we need to understand why we're talking about ancient Greece. We need to understand why we are talking about democracy and how democracy ties in with ancient Greece. So what is democracy? Anyone have any ideas what democracy is? You are sixth graders.
Voting.
Voting? Yeah, voting is a very important part in democracy. Who votes?
I'm in sixth grade.
You're in sixth grade. You don't vote. Do your parents vote? No, your parents don't vote. Well, people over the age of 18 are able to vote in democracy, and there are different stipulations, but we're talking about ancient Greece. So, a democracy means rule by the people. So in this situation, you have, individual groups, councils or assemblies coming together and making rules, making legislation. You don't have a ruler. You don't have a king or a monarch or a pharaoh. You have someone, a group of people ruling together, and that's important. What people? I know we talked about maybe your parents could vote. Do you have any other ideas of who is involved in a democracy?
Grandparents.
Your grandparents? What about the mayor of the town? You think he's involved in democracy? Yeah. What about, you don't think so, Elliot? Why not?
I mean, you said rule by people.
Mhm. Isn't he a person?
I mean,
Does he vote?
he might be a pharaoh kind of person.
You can compare him to the pharaoh. I see that, but the mayor doesn't have complete control. He is once again in the system of ruling by the people, and we'll elaborate on what that means a little bit more. But before we touch on that, we need to understand where we are and where we're talking about. So we have a map up here, and where we're talking about is Greece, and we're talking about democracy. A lot of people think of democracy and they don't think about Greece. They think about the Western world and the United States. So where's the United States on the map? Up there, and Greece is way over here. So it's kind of crazy to think about the world that we live in, which is we like to think of ourselves in democratic principles, but it started all the way across the sea. So why? Why ancient Greece? Why was this where it started? Well, back in 300 to 500 BC, the world was a dangerous place. You had Greece, you can see here from the blown up picture, it is surrounded by sea. You have lots of areas of entrance, and this led to waves of invaders coming into Greece and taking property, taking people, and violence spread all over the country. So in order to do this, people banded together to protect their property, to protect their families, and formed what we know as city-states. So city-states are political units that are made up of a city and all the surrounding area. Does this sound familiar? Do you think of anything of this in real life? In our time? So it's a city and all the surrounding area. Does that sound like our town? Kind of. So let's look a little bit more of what the city-state looked like. So you have a couple main parts. You have the Acropolis, you have houses and markets, and you have walls. These are the three main parts that we're going to talk about. So the Acropolis, you can see, is in the center. There's an arrow pointing to it. And that is a fortress or a very important building that's high up on a hill. Why do you think it would be high up on a hill?
Defense reasons.
Defensive reasons. That's a very good point. You have one of your most important buildings in your city-state high up. It's hard to reach. It's a good place to go if there are waves of invaders. You can go and you can be protected. You also have houses and markets. Houses and markets surround the Acropolis. They line it. And then around houses and market, there are the walls. So what are the advantages of these? Well, the first advantage of the city-state layout would be protection. Why? Why do you think? Elliot already said that the Acropolis allows for protection. What else could allow for protection? The wall. Why? It keeps people out. And when you have the wall surrounding your city, it makes it a lot harder for invaders to come in. Another form of protection would be found within the houses being so close together. This is because if you are close to your neighbor and somebody is coming and trying to rob you, your neighbor is there and they can help you. with this sense of community, you are protecting your neighbor and your neighbor is protecting you because you live so close together. Another advantage is trade and commerce. So your text states that with the city being this close together and having a market system, trade was finally safe for people to go about in their everyday lives. People were being robbed, people were being killed because of trade and unsafe conditions, so it was a new revelation for these people. And the last advantage would be identity. So people of Greece, they defined themselves as people of Greece before city-states. But when city-states came around, they began to get a new form of identity, and they identified with their specific city-state. So Athens was a city-state that we will talk about more. So within Athens, they defined themselves as people of Athens, not people of Greece. And that's really important. Yes?
Can you go back to the... Yes. So the city-state is within the walls, right?
Yeah.
So what are the group of houses outside of the walls?
Okay, so outside of the walls, these are your rural areas. So you can compare this to kind of like, we have, main buildings in the city of Lafayette. You have markets, you have restaurants, you have, banks and government places, but you don't really see farms inside the walls. They don't really fit, do they? So you have rural areas and farms that will line the outside to provide resources. And you also have the harbor, but that is not the main point of our lecture today. We are just talking about the Acropolis, the houses and markets, and the walls. But very good question. So with the advantages that we just talked about of city-states, Greece entered a golden age, and it's important to understand what a golden age is. But what do you think of when you think of Greece? Just like the first thing off of your mind. What do you think of? Zeus? Mythology? Anybody else? What do you think of? Socrates, philosophers. I tend to think of art and, I don't know, rivers for some reason. It's weird. But, okay. So the Golden Age is a period in a society's history marked by great achievements. And during 300 to 500 BC, Greece was able to enter this golden age and make monumental jumps in history, in their history. So let's talk about those jumps. So first, let's talk about increased power. It was 500 BC, Persian army tried to conquer Greece. And they sent in waves of invaders. They were very strong, very organized, very powerful. And Greece to them looked like a small, unorganized country that was very easily invaded and conquered. Well, with the power of Athens, a city-state that bound together, they were able to defeat the Persians, and this made Athens the cultural center of Greece. And with this, the leader of Athens, Pericles, had a lot to do with the Golden Age. When I say leader, do I mean he was the pharaoh? Do I mean he was a king? No, we're talking about democracy. So this means that Pericles ruled, but within a community of people. He had a council, he had an assembly. So Pericles really introduced democracy into Athens. He made sure that individuals were able to vote, which is an important thing that we do in our community. Individuals were able to push legislature to a council, and then that gets decided by the council, not just a ruler. Another achievement was architecture. What is architecture? Buildings, that's very good. Could you consider anything else? Maybe bridges? Architecture? Yeah. So we have buildings, we have bridges. Mainly in the Golden Age of Greece, the buildings, the temples were made out of this great marble stone, and people would symbolize the glory of their city through these temples. If you go back here, you can see old buildings. This is actually present day. This was a great works. This was a temple that symbolized the glory of the city, and you can tell just how big it was. So, along with the temples that symbolize the glory of the city, which is also a term and a concept that appeared on your study guide, so you should remember that, there was art. So art would appear in these temples, these great works, and you would see sculptures, you would see art, but artists weren't just, going out and drawing however they thought. They were actually looking at the human body. They were studying how cloth sat on the body. They were studying how muscles bent and all this crazy things. And you can see from this picture, you can see how intricate the cloth is and how it actually looks like it falls right around her foot the correct way. You can see how delicate her hand is holding the vase. And this was the style of art back then. This was monumental, and we'll see why that is. Good. Okay, so we have a picture on the left, we have a picture, my right, and a picture on the left. Okay, so right and left. We are going to do a quick comparison of these pictures. So what do you think? What do you see when you see these two pictures? Compare and contrast.
Shirtless, or they're both are shirtless.
Yeah, they're both shirtless, that's very good. They're both men.
Muscles.
Muscles. Which one looks more muscular?
Left.
Left. This one? Are you talking about this one?
Yeah, you're right.
Yes. So this one, can you see how defined the muscles are here? What period do you think this is from? Maybe the period we're talking about right now, the golden age of Greece. We're talking about how they studied the body, how they studied how individual cloth sat, how they studied muscles, and how they worked on the body. And then you have a picture of, this actually is Ramses II. So this was in 1300 BC, and this was in 500 BC. So a very long time apart, but you can see how different this is from that, and that's important to us. Okay, now moving on from art, we have science. Science was also a hugely impacted area in this golden age of achievement. Scientists were also studying bodies, but they weren't studying them in the way the artists did. They were looking at, how biology works. They were looking at what's inside the bodies, which might seem a little gross, but people had to do it. And they were learning about medicine. They were learning about which herbs impacted which area. They were learning about how you could affect each area of the body. And then you have philosophers. So I heard someone say a philosopher's name, I think it was Laura. Do you know any philosophers of this time? Any Greek philosophers? You said Plato?
No,
You said Socrates. So there's Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. Those are the three main philosophers of the era, and they impacted philosophy so much. Philosophers studied why people thought about what they thought about. They wanted to know how people could be happy, and they wanted to know why they made the decisions